I did a couple degrees in piano before I eventually moved on to composition. Part of the reason that I moved on to composition was that I just got so tired, welcome, glad to have you, of the piano decaying, you know? You play a note and it disappears. And that really got to me after a while. And I was listening to all these just gorgeous recordings of British boy choirs singing all this glorious, expressive music and doing all these amazing things with their voices. And here we have this instrument that by nature goes boom. So I really got kind of burnt out on the piano. I got sick of trying to be something that I really wasn't, or trying to make this instrument something that it really wasn't. You know, we have all these ways of trying to make the piano sing, so to speak, but it doesn't really do that. We have to fake it, and we have all these little tricks that we do to try to make it seem like it's singing and sustaining and crescendoing, you know. No matter how hard I press, nothing happens, it doesn't get louder. So I really turned to kind of the choral side of things, and even the orchestral side of things for a while, compositionally, before eventually kind of coming back to piano. And I feel like I sort of come full circle now because I love collaborating with choirs, and I would rather accompany any day than conduct. I'm a terrible conductor. I'm much more comfortable at the keyboard, and truth be told, as you all know, the pianist is really the one in charge anyway.
That's right.
But we won't tell our conductors that, right? We'll let them think they're actually running the show. Yeah. There's a couple more chairs here. Good to see you again. I don't remember where I've seen you before, but I know I've seen you.
Like last summer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good. Welcome. So that's kind of my musical journey in a nutshell, where I've kind of come full circle all the way back to piano, and enjoy collaborating that way. The workshop that I'm doing here is in two parts, and it's called Piano Arranging and Performing, which is kind of a broad umbrella, isn't it? I thought I would just talk maybe a little more about the arranging side of things this first hour today. And then tomorrow morning, if you're a glutton for punishment, I think it's 8 o'clock that my second half is. But I promise to do very interesting and engaging and energizing things at 8 in the morning if you're interested in coming back. And if you have something else you want to do, that's totally fine too. I thought I would just talk a little bit today about my creative process. How many of you do some arranging of your own? Yeah, okay. So maybe half or so. So I'm trying to aim at saying things that are interesting for those of you that maybe don't really care to do some arranging, and maybe also helpful for those of you that are interested in arranging type things. I certainly can't be comprehensive about here's how I write. That's probably the most common question. How do you write music? We don't really have a step-by-step process for that by which everybody can just suddenly write music, you know. But I thought maybe I would just share some of my process and my values as a composer and as a musician in the hopes that maybe it's interesting and or helpful for you. The first thing I wanted to just talk about briefly is my creative process in terms of where do you begin. People often wonder where ideas come from and how you get from this, something to a completed piece. The book that I brought to demonstrate from for this is a collection of piano solo arrangements. And people, look at these and go, how do you come up with this thing? Or, well, I've written one stanza, but how do I make a whole piece out of it? That's actually the same question. And I just want to offer you one thought, namely that people tend to view composition as moving from some tiny little building block all the way up to some completed piece. And I'm just here to tell you that's not necessarily the case. You've heard me talk about this. There's a lot of ways in which we may start with a bigger idea and work towards something smaller, believe it or not. Or actually, truth be told, welcome, come on in. Oh, okay, never mind. Not welcome then. There's a lot lot of ways in which we really go back and forth. So in other words, for me, I don't necessarily sit down and try to, grit my teeth really hard, and suddenly some thing comes out. And suddenly from there, I build and build and build and build and build until suddenly, boom, here's a piece. Nor is it a matter always, really, of starting with some big concept. I want to write a neo-Baroque piece, and I want it to invoke Vivaldi, and then, okay, make that. Really, for me, it's much more back and forth. Sometimes I start with a little idea, but I can't think about my little idea for very long before I have to decide what exactly I'm going to try to build with it. I have to know where I'm going. And neither can I just start on the big end of things and say, okay, I'm going to imagine this masterpiece, and here's how it's all going to work. And then, well, what am I going to use to create that? A good analogy is almost like building a house. And on one side, you have the architect who's imagining some great big thing. And on the other end of things, you have a contractor who's supposed to actually buy the correct materials and build something out of it. As a composer, you're both architect and contractor. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's not that either one has to come first. There are times when the contractor says, I've got some really good tile. This would look really good in a bathroom somewhere. And then we adjust our blueprint to accommodate these materials that we have. And just as many times, we may have just a big picture idea of what's supposed to happen. And then we go look for the right materials at Home Depot to actually create that product. But in the end, they kind of have to work together. They have to go back and forth. It's not always just a matter of gathering little materials and putting them together until suddenly, boom, there it is. I have a few pieces in here. Are any of you familiar with this? It's fairly new, so yeah, good. I can play new things for you then. Most of these are transcriptions of choral pieces, actually. Just pieces that a lot of people said, oh, I want to do this piano solo. So I just chose the ones that were probably most popular for that or most requested and put them together. I wrote a couple new things for this as well. But here's a couple pieces. There's a setting of When I Survey in here that actually began with the big picture. It was commissioned for choir orchestra and Ilian pipes, which is like a bagpipe except a little even less wieldy and very haunting. Think Braveheart soundtrack. That's Ilian pipe. So I had a big picture. I know what I'm supposed to create, and then I had to go find materials to build it. So I knew I had kind of a maybe kind of Celtic sound world. You can't help it with the pipes like that. But I had to find musical material that would accommodate that. So after some hemming and hawing, I wrote. Do you hear what I'm doing there? What elements of like Celtic or weighty or Ilian pipes, or what do you hear there?
The drone.
The drone, certainly. Look at the stylistic analysis on the spot.
The little turn.
Da-da.
That's typical to Celtic music.
Absolute little Scottish snap rhythm, maybe it's sometimes called da-da, the 16th and a dotted 8th. Yep. There's that little modal inflection. Da-da-da-dum, bottom. So all these little pieces, come together to create something bigger than the sum of the parts. Right? There's something more going on when all that comes together than just this plus this plus this. So that started big picture, but I had to find all these little elements that help create it. A couple examples in here that work the exact opposite way. You didn't really get to hear When I Survey, but we'll get to it later, I'm sure. Here's a setting of How Great Thou Art. And again, this is originally choral. Here, I had a commission for a setting of How Great Thou Art, and I didn't have any kind of big picture idea whatsoever. I just stared at that hymn and thought, why does the world need another arrangement of this? And what can I do that might actually contribute to the literature in some way where people might actually want to perform some new setting of How Great Thou Art? So before I thought of any arranging of the tune that we all know, I thought of this choral introduction that says, "Oh Lord my God." So in the piano version here, it's So then it's actually a matter of taking these little pieces that I have, like this dramatic dum ba da dum, and also this little kind of Rachmaninoff sounding melody. Now, how can I create a whole arrangement out of that? And granted, that's a whole other question. There is one more chair if you want. That's a whole other issue. Like, how do we weave that in and out and do all that kind of thing? But this is a bottom-up piece. This is gathering little materials and putting them together. One more quick example of that same kind of thing. Here's a setting of The King of Love to this tune. You know, St. Columba. This is a setting I wrote by writing a counter melody to that. I thought, how can I write counterpoint against that? And so I wrote this. It's a melody that fits along with it. It's just good old-fashioned counterpoint. And then I built an arrangement out of that, so that melody stands on its own at the beginning. But that whole piece arose from that little idea. So all I'm trying to say is, don't get the idea that every single piece has to start with some tiny thing and then it goes in one direction. And don't even get the idea that every single piece has to start with a big concept and then work its way down to the little nitty-gritty that can create it. For me, my creative process is much more back and forth. I can't write little stuff very long without thinking about what am I trying to build out of this. And I can't imagine great symphonic works for very long without saying, now what little pieces do I need to actually create this pipe dream of mine? And it's really much more of a back and forth kind of process. I bring that up, maybe some of you that don't do arranging are like, oh, okay, whatever. For those of you that do some arranging, that's usually a very helpful concept because it frees us from misconceptions about how you're supposed to write music, or even maybe how everybody else writes music as compared to me. That's the way composers usually feel. And usually composers don't talk in that language. They don't necessarily put it in those terms. But every time I talk to some other composer that I really respect, I discover that their process, in more or less in so many words, is very similar to what I just said. We just don't necessarily think about it in those terms. So I'm just trying to come up with language for it. Do you have any questions on that? No, it's kind of a weird concept. Architects and engineers and contractors.
I have one.
Yes,
If
go
you
for it.
started just as a piano piece and it wasn't an adaptation of a choral piece, would your approach be different to it, especially when you're not necessarily, you are thinking about the text of the piece, but it's not as driven by the text with no one singing it?
Let me show you my notes on my iPad here. Point number 2. I'm never far from text. Well said. Yeah, that's really my next point.
Okay.
Is that I even when I'm arranging at the piano, I'm not forsaking text, which is good news for some of you. I'm always thinking words. I feel like if I'm going to write a concert paraphrase on some hymn tune that's supposed to be played in a recital, then yeah, I may not care so much. I may just be writing like theme and variations on a sacred tune. But if I'm writing if I'm writing a piece for church, yeah, this happens when I don't sleep enough. If I'm writing a piece for church use, I want it to be worshipful, not just, wow, look what I can do compositionally or pianistically. And so I'm trying to get people to think about some kind of truth, not just beauty. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there's a place for beauty. If all I cared about was truth, we would just have like public recitations of creeds or something. And that's an important part of worship, but it's not all there is to worship. And a wonderful aspect of God is that he's not just true, he's also good and he's also beautiful. And I want to combine truth and goodness and beauty. You didn't know that was going to get philosophical, did you? I want those three to come together, and even in a marketable product like this. You know, if there's going to be some kind of ministry and worship involved, I'm trying to aim people at my texts. So that's not to say that there's not a place for beauty, because there absolutely is. That's why we're here right now. But in my instrumental arranging, I'm usually pretty tied to text. There are several places in here where I have, it didn't fit on every single piece, but like at the end of How Great Thou Art, here's those are the stanzas that I used. It may not be the complete piece, but those are the ones that I'm trying to paint in my writing. There are a couple places in this How Great Thou Art, you know the words. Do you know what the stanza is saying? Yeah, that's woods and forest glades I wandered, and birds, and there's flowing. So I'm actually drawing inspiration instrumentally from text there, even though I'm not necessarily setting text for a vocalist. Here's the next stanza. You know what text that is?
He's on the cross.
Yeah, that's when I think that God is Son, not. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to speak to you through that. I'm trying to write it and play it in such a way that you know what I'm saying. It's hopefully clear there. I could play the last stanza and it would be pretty obvious. When Christ shall come, got to have one of those at the end of every piece, right? Yeah. So I'm trying to put text across there. There are several other places in here where there's maybe unique musical moments that might not even make sense entirely apart from text. Like, whoa, why the sudden drop back there? And sometimes it's in fact often it's just for text purposes. Now, those of you that are creative and do some arranging, I don't want to overstate the case here, because it's possible to feel like every last idea has to be so driven by text that if you just come up with some good musical idea, you can't use it. I'm not trying to bind your musical conscience in some way. I want you to be free to do your thing. And there's a time to just come up with great musical ideas and use them. There's a setting in here of Rejoice the Lord is King, for instance. If I can find it. Yeah. Set all the nuances and intricacies of whatever this first stanza says. I don't remember at the moment. My big point is rejoice. So there, I suppose I am setting text in a way, but I'm just setting one word. It's kind of a very big macro text setting, not trying to paint every little phrase or every, go up for the word heaven or down for the word depths. Or, I'm not. It's not that fussy. It's just a big picture kind of text setting. It's still appropriate to the text, but it's much more musically driven than just trying to be all finicky about it. Does that make some sense? My friend Mike Ware? That's a good question. You handed me my next point perfectly. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I do that with in congregational leading. I look at the text, for instance, on How Great Thou Art, and do the same thing that you did. On the verse that it talks about, when I think of God as Son, not sparing, we'll get solemn, more solemn on that, maybe a little bit slower tempo. I direct my congregation just like I direct my choir.
Good.
And we'll try to bring those ideas out, and then like you said, then we'll a lot of times we'll modulate or make a little instrumental break, and then get really big into the last
Sure.
verse, make it more triumphant. And after you can train your people to do that. I've had people tell me they couldn't get the congregation to do it. I said, no, you can train them. They'll after you do a few fermatas, maybe just a beat longer or so, and they'll learn to watch you.
Exactly. Yeah. After they pay the price.
Yeah. But I think that's just like I think that's essential that you're faithful to the text as much as you can be, because there are some within many of our powerful hymns, there's so many different moods.
Absolutely. And like I say, for me, it really goes back to just a little more philosophical point about what am I really trying to do here? You know, what is my big goal in setting this particular piece for worship? Sure.
So do you often think from the perspective, I guess, of the listener, and what sort of journey you want to take them on, as far as, maybe when do you want to take them exactly where they expect you to go, and when do you want to maybe surprise them or change the mood suddenly out of the middle of nowhere, and do you ever think from that direction?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific thing? Yes, but
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, how often you work from that direction and how you sort of map that out, if you did map it out, or it just sort of grew naturally out of what you were working on at the time,
I'm always thinking about my audience's response, whether it be a congregation or a concert audience or whoever. I don't think you could be a composer without trying to think about how does this music strike its listener, whoever your listener is going to be. I mean, even if you're Milton Babbitt, you have a very select few people that you're trying to write for, but you're thinking about how it's going to strike them. Everybody has an audience, even Milton Babbitt, even though he may not want to. I don't know why I'm picking on Milton Babbitt because he wrote a famous article about that kind of thing. Who cares if you listen? Yeah, I think you have to be aware of your audience's response. In terms of big picture, you do have to balance text setting, like on a micro level, with the bigger journey that you're on within a piece. Every piece. This is a point I think maybe it's my next point. Did you just hand that to me again? Yeah. No, it's 2 points down. But every music, we don't paint on a canvas. A visual artist is bound by his or her canvas. This is a 16 by 24 oil print or whatever. A musician is bound by time. That's the silence through time is what we make our art, what we paint on. And you can't just have a collection of little tableaus. Like, here's a high moment, here's a low moment, here's another low moment, here's another low moment, here's another low, here's a high, here's a low, here's a low. Whoa. I just had a collection of interesting things, but there wasn't arc to that. There wasn't shape. There wasn't a drama that unfolded. So, yeah, you have to manage both the micro and the macro in terms of, okay, I want to set these few little moments or this emotion or that emotion or whatever, but there has to be a big picture too. Is that part of what you're asking?
Yeah, well, and like, at least for me, because sometimes I'm arranging for whatever's going to happen in worship that day. So am I leading them towards a time of prayer? Am I leading them towards the sermon? Am I leading them from something? That's kind of where I was
Yeah,
headed.
so you just went like meta instead of macro. Okay, now how does this piece fit within a much bigger narrative within a liturgy,
Right.
perhaps? What am I trying to accomplish? Yeah, good call. Any other thoughts or questions related to text or form? Okay, my third thing here is just that you have to balance unity and diversity. And this may be overly simplistic to say, but it works itself out in everyone's creative process. You have to have enough different things that happen, diversity, to keep people's interest, to keep their attention. This is where Philip Glass doesn't hit the average listener very well. They want more diversity than that. There's a little too much unity, if I can put it that way, in Philip Glass. On the other hand, the reason so many people dislike a lot of modern 20 and 21st century music, in terms of art music, is that it seems to be all diversity to them. All they hear is blips and blops, and they aren't able to perceive any kind of structural unity within it. They don't hear some kind of repetition or some motive or some motto or some leitmotif or all those things that several hundred years of music history did to hold their music together. Suddenly in the 20th century, people are holding their music together via things that aren't readily perceivable. And it takes a lot more digging to figure out how this music holds together, So I think if we're going to connect with like the normal person in our pews, in our churches, we have to find some kind of balance in the middle there, where there's enough unity for a piece to hold together and enough diversity for a piece to keep someone's interest. So they don't go to sleep during Philip Glass or just yawn and just daydream because they can't hang on to anything. So in any of the pieces like I'm doing here, whatever recurring material, whatever like unifying motive is there, it has to come back enough, but not too much. So let me play through The King of Love My Shepherd is here. I already showed you what kind of unifying motive is here. Listen through this piece in terms of how often that motive shows up. Because that's something you have to make very conscious decisions about. We'll talk about it when it's over here. Is it too loud if I play out? Are you guys getting kind of blown away?
We're
Okay.
good. Let her rip.
Try to. Yeah. So you heard that whole stanza had the dum ba dum kind of stuff woven all the way through it, right? First interlude, still there. Now here's the second stanza. You think I'm gonna keep going bum ba dum bum? If I did, it would have to be in a very different way because we've probably heard enough of that by now. So here's something new. Yeah, so that's all. Where streams of living waters flow. It's text driven again. But there weren't any of those little dum bum bum. It was time to get away from that. Oh, did you catch that?
Slipped one in.
Tiny little hint. That's that motive from the beginning. Yeah, it's just a little lower neighbor. Whoop-de-doo. But at that moment, it's pretty important because we've just done a whole stanza of something very different, but we're saying, don't go too far. Here we've gone to quarter note motion instead of triplets. You ever noticed how hard it is to get out of triplets? I heard a guy once like playing a piano prelude to a service, and he was just kind of improvising. And this is years and years ago. It's nobody you would know. And he got going on triplets, and he just couldn't get out. Have you ever heard that happen? Like, help! I'm stuck in triplets. He just couldn't find a way to like switch back to eighth notes. It just got busier and busier and busier. And, it takes some guts to just let the and then to go eighth notes and quarters. same little building block gets used as introduction. It gets used as counter melody simultaneously with the real melody. It gets used as a little hint during triplets. It gets used as a building interlude. It gets used as accompaniment to the big climactic stanza. And yet it also gets used as a winding down to nothing, kind of, dissipating all that energy at the end. So by taking one little idea and just presenting it in a lot of different ways, hopefully that achieves some unity. The piece holds together and makes sense, and people don't feel lost listening to it, or it doesn't feel like collage, or pastiche. And yet at the same time, there's enough variety of ways that it's used that it keeps people's attention, and we create that big picture drama. Instead of just having a little collection of moments, we have a long line narrative, a dramatic arc, if you will, that makes all that possible. So that's what I mean about balancing unity and diversity. And if you're a consumer of piano arrangements, those are probably the arrangements that you like the most, the ones that accomplish that well. It's one of the things about them, probably. If you're the kind of person who writes these kind of arrangements, that's the kind of thing that you have to make very conscious decisions about all the way through your process. The last little idea here is just that the big picture, the plot that we're talking about, that drama, is accomplished by paying attention to all those things: unity and diversity, the big picture of your form, and even staying true to your text. A lot of times the big picture of the music is the same kind of narrative as the text gave you, depending on which stanzas you choose or whatever. That says a lot about what kind of musical form you're creating. Any thoughts or comments on the concept? Easier said than done, sure, right? Oh yeah, just balance unity and diversity. Yeah, right. Just a couple quick closing points, and then let's just kind of talk and maybe do a little Q&A or whatever you want to talk about. One thing that I'm always trying to do as I arrange is to get maximum impact out of minimum investment. I'm looking for ways to create the most meaningful musical experience, I guess is the word, with a minimal amount of effort. The hardest thing in the world is to write easy music, or we could even say easier music than what you're capable of playing. You can write some amazing thing that incorporates, Chopin's Winter Wind Etude with Jesus Loves Me. That's actually a kind of funny concept. Never mind. Jesus loves me through the storm. It's easy to just let yourself go like that, but to constrain yourself in a small enough box where lots of people can perform this, or this comes across well without requiring people to practice it for 8 hours to perform on Sunday, that's a trick. I think probably in general, my pieces are probably known for being a little harder than maybe your average church market music. Even my choral accompaniments probably are, truth be told. But I'm always looking for difficulty that's worth it. The kind of piece where, yeah, I may have to practice this a couple times before Sunday, but I want to because I see what kind of effect it's going to put across. As opposed to the kind of piece where you know you're going to have to practice it in an hour, and you really just are not going to enjoy that hour, and you're looking forward to this Sunday being over, so you don't have to play this thing anymore. I'm looking for returns on the investment for the person who wants to perform it.
Dan, do you differentiate between paring down and parameters in your writing? Because I find parameters help me, if they say it needs to be SAD, or it's got to be in 4/4 and E flat, and it needs to be about Puccini. I find that very liberating to have parameters, like you said, hard often to speak at a lower level than you're capable of.
Yeah, your parameters were stylistic and like performing forces. I'm just thinking of limitations in terms of difficulty,
Right.
which is related certainly. If you're going to write an SAB piece, it's probably not like Russian choir, Moscow radio, SAB piece. I suppose they're interrelated that way. But yeah, parameters are helpful sometimes, and they're limiting other times. It can go either way, I'm sure. Sometimes it is very helpful, like that Ilian pipes thing. I knew exactly what sound world that person wanted for that. That actually gets into the whole question of commissions at that point. And do you want to write what you have to say, or do you want to be a mercenary and write what other people want you to say? And my answer to that is I'm always looking for ways to line up what a commissioner wants with something I already wanted to say. And if I can't, then I just say no to the commission. But that's easier said than done a lot of times, and it gets tricky. But anyway, it's interesting. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to make a comment. It's true that some of your things are harder to play, but they're so accessible. They're so beautifully written for the hand and for we know you're a pianist, just by the way it feels.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that needs to be said is just writing for the hand. You know, vocalists always talk about that person knows how to write for the voice. You know, and there are lots of pianists who don't know how to write for the voice. And, well, this worked fine when I played it. You know, like, well, I have to sing it. I don't get to just press down notes. I have to breathe and create music at the same time, or else I'm going to die. You know, pianists just sit here and breathe, and their music making is disconnected from that. I mean, in terms of staying alive. Does that make sense? You know, we can just breathe whenever we want. The vocalist can't. There's so much for that. But when we flip the tables, we have to write for the hand. And there's so many vocalists that write at the piano, and they think, well, as long as I don't have like cascading octaves and glissandos or something, then, well, that's not hard. I mean, look at the page, you know. But yeah, the page may not be fly-specky. It may not be like Joe Martin, 600 notes per square inch. I make that joke at him, so I'm not saying anything about him that I wouldn't say to him. He wins the prize sometimes for note density, you know. There's a I'm sorry.
Gets paid by the man.
Yeah, exactly. There's an art to making things just fit under the hand well. And even when Joe's writing 600 notes per square inch, he's a pianist, and it's going to work. You know, it's the difference between playing Chopin and Brahms, if you're into that sort of thing. You know, you can look at a Chopin page, and here's this huge, you know, fly-specky, Q-sized cadenza type thing. And you sit down to play it, and your hand just goes, oh, okay, we can do that. And then you get this page of Brahms that's like this 4-part counterpoint, and your fingers are just, oh. And it's not a matter of reach or anything. It's just a matter of trying to make sense of all these lines. And Brahms is just thinking purely musical thoughts. And then the pianist is left to try to recreate them, which is fine. It's just a lot harder. But yeah, so there's something to be said about writing pieces that, even if they are more challenging, fit the hand. And you all know that. I'm preaching to the choir here. If you've written piano accompaniments written by a brass player or something, you know what I'm talking about. It gets kind of ugly. So anyway, looking for maximum impact from minimum investment or difficulty. A lot of times, just leaving out one note, you know, or just jumping from this one to that. Oh, it's a lot easier to lead if I just write these 2 instead of these 3. Or, you know, just I have a bunch of 8th note motion, but I need to leave one note out and just write a quarter note here because I have a big jump coming up. You know, that kind of thing. It's just making it work for the pianist is critical. That's all I need to say, I think. What do you want to talk about? We have 15 minutes.
What else is in that book?
I'm going to work from this book tomorrow too. Tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit about just playing, performing, and my values as a pianist, what I think good playing is, and how I try to accomplish that. I think it may be an even better session than today's, really. So if you come, hopefully you'll find it helpful. And I'll play more things from this tomorrow as well. But I can play a little more here too if you want. There's the How Great Thou Art that I played some of. The King of Love, My Shepherd Is, which I played the whole thing for you. There's a setting of Morning Has Broken that's in here. It's kind of interesting. You get the idea. It should just Jesus, I love thee, that's written kind of as a memorial piece. That's another counter melody type piece. There's a nearer, still nearer from a choral setting. Probably play more of that tomorrow. I already played a little bit of Rejoice, the Lord is King, that classical thing. It's probably the easiest. Well, in some ways it's easiest. The last stanza has augmentation. It gets all kind of brassy and organ. Trying to act like I have three hands when I really don't. There's a lot going on. The one I survey feels kind of Celtic that I played a little bit of for you. There's a nearer my God to thee that I'll talk about tomorrow. It's puts it in 6/8, slows it down, and just kind of lets you absorb the meaning. And then the last piece in here is a hymn tune that I wrote for Rise My Soul Arise. I don't know if any of you have done that. It's a choral piece originally. But very thoughtful, reflective.
Dan, why don't you take just a simple, something like Jesus Loves Me, and show how you would do chord substitutions, how you would make it richer.
Oh yeah, chord substitution is an interesting thing for me because I really don't think in those terms. I don't usually. I think a lot more in terms of line than in terms of what chord I can use in any given place. I'm usually trying to put one line against another, and I'm trying to write counterpoint, and I feel like chords arise from that more than me thinking really tricky about, oh, what kind of juicy chord can I substitute here? And sometimes I suppose my harmonies get I mean, I hope they get interesting or compelling or different, variety at some point. But I don't really think in terms of reharmonizing so much as I do in terms of at least melody and bass line. I'm often thinking about reworking a bass line and then seeing what chords arise from it, maybe. But for me, that's a very thoughtful process. I mean, I can sit down and perhaps improvise some new feeling setting of Jesus Loves Me or something. But I go through a lot of, does this work? No. Does that work? No. And it's a lot less just sitting down and improvising substituted chords and a lot more just kind of working out counterpoint, if I dare put it that way. I write a lot of concert music too. I kind of divide my time half and half between church music and just more art music for choirs and orchestra and stuff. And it's probably that kind of bleeding through a little bit. Probably if I were more of a jazzer, I might think in terms of chord substitution, but I'm always thinking more in terms of constructing lines. I don't know. I probably need a pocket protector and just kind of shuffle along. Give me a few years, maybe I'll be there. I'm probably not the best person to do that. I don't know that it would be terribly instructive. I would just be writing a new bass line and trying to write chords that accommodate it. But I'd be working through a lot of bad options before I found a good one I wanted to keep.
Well, in your arrangements, I'm hearing chords that are not. It's not the same chords that we sing in the hymnal.
Certainly.
And so I'm just wondering your process on that.
Yeah, and I almost get messed up if I start thinking in terms of chords, which probably sounds really weird or like anathema. But I start getting kind of vanilla and plain Jane if I start thinking too much about, I substituted a 6 chord here. That's just not quite how so I'm glad that you hear it that way. Because whatever I do ends up creating that kind of thing, but it's probably not how I go about thinking about it. Yes?
I came in late, so you may have talked about this already, but how do you compose at the piano and then put it in finale, or what program can you talk about getting it on the page?
Yeah, my doctoral teacher, when people ask him, how do you write music, he said, any way that I can. That's the best answer I know. For me, sometimes I spend a lot of time just at a really bad Yamaha keyboard and a Mac, an Apple computer, and just put notes directly in that way. That comes up short a fair amount for me, and so I usually have to get to a real piano sooner or later and then kind of edit my score on a real piano. If I had access to a real piano in a place that didn't have 3 young kids running around all the time, then I might work at a piano more. But if I want to have concentration, I have to kind of hole away in my office and try to close the door. It doesn't stay closed anyway. But
Do you use finale?
I do. I like Sibelius better, but I tried switching over about a year ago or a year and a half ago, and it was just I'm so quick in finale, and there's so many things I do mindlessly that it gets out of the way of me thinking creatively, and I can just get it on the page without thinking about how to get it on the page. When I tried to switch over, I was just spending so much time thinking about, this keyboard shortcut doesn't do that. How do I do that in Sibelius?
Right.
I think Sibelius is way more intuitive and friendly and a nicer experience. They don't pay me to say that. That's my opinion. But I learned on finale, and with my writing schedule, I just don't have time to take 2 months off and just get up to speed in Sibelius. If you don't have a writing schedule and deadlines and you have some time, it's probably worth giving Sibelius a look if you're a finale person. But they're pretty similar anymore anyway. They've really copied each other's best features enough where it's not so big a gulf between them as it used to be. But to finish answering your question, sometimes it's driving, sometimes it's mowing the lawn. I wrote the Kyrie for my Requiem while mowing the lawn. I was just working out ideas, singing. Nobody could hear me over the din of the mower.
And you
Not
never
there.
forget what you've composed, 5 minutes ago while you're in the next section?
No,
or
I don't move on to the next section. If I come up with an idea I need to keep, I don't let myself keep going. I hold on there until I can get it
You might
written
go
down.
record it or go write it down.
Something like that, yeah. I used to do the record. I had a half-hour commute during my time at KU, and I actually had a little digital recorder. I would just sing ideas into it so I could keep driving. But yeah, if I'm in the shower, which is another good place to think for me. Pepper Choplin has a really funny song about the shower. He would resonate with that. If I'm there, like three ideas is kind of my max in the shower. If I go to a 4th one, I'll forget the first one. So sometimes I'm literally getting out of the shower going, last verse up to G flat, that melody can turn down to scale degree 6 and try the timpani on beat 4, and I'm like repeating it to myself over and over until I can go write it down, So it is tricky trying to hang on to ideas, and I don't remember well. My memory is terrible. I have to write everything down. So, but I write all sorts of different ways and places. Vocal music, I try to sing a lot and not just always be at the piano. I find more intuitive vocal lines by singing rather than just plunking them at the piano. And if I am writing vocal lines at the piano, I'm just using the piano as a tool. I'm not using it. I'm not letting my fingers dictate the line. I'm letting my mind and my voice dictate the line, and my fingers reproduce that. So I don't write pianistic vocal lines. There were a couple of, yeah.
I just want to thank you for When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. My youth choir went on tour this summer, and that was their favorite piece. There's 26
good.
of them, and we had an 8th grade cellist who played the violin part.
Good, yeah.
And
Nice.
they just love that piece.
You didn't have Ilian pipes.
No, I didn't have Ilian pipes.
Nobody does.
But they
That's
love
why I wrote
the piece. I just want to thank you for it.
Yeah, nobody has the pipes. I'm just teasing. The type part is given to violin or viola or something.
Right.
Yes.
Do you have a piano version of Lead Kindly Light yet?
Wow. No. Probably the accompaniment there will suffice.
Stand by itself.
Yeah.
That's what I thought too. I'm allowed to do that then, huh?
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, go
Just-
for it.
Just play the piano.
Yeah, that's a very piano driven piece.
Yeah. Terrific.
Yeah. So what other questions do you have or things you wanna
Can we buy that book someplace?
This
Yeah.
yeah, they've got it at the store
Up front, okay.
here, yeah, on Scott. And they will sell it to you at 10% off, I think,
Mhm.
or whatever during the
And give it to you, hopefully.
10%?
Yeah.
Well, they don't give me that 10%. My publisher will give me 10%. Yeah, it's a good thing.
And this kind of arises from what you were saying. Do you generally focus on one piece of music until you have brought it to fruition, if you will? Or do you like to balance a couple of different things going on at the same time? Is that just out of reach?
It's usually one at a time.
Okay.
If I work on two different pieces at the same time, I'm looking for musical solutions to the musical problems in one piece. And then when I find solutions, I start applying them to both pieces
That's what I wondered.
instead of
yeah.
one. Yeah, so and then I just end up with formulas. And I have two pieces that kind of accomplish the same thing without trying or whatever, so it's usually not good. I can write like a choral piece and like score something for orchestra at the same time because the solutions to the problems are totally different there. So right now, like this past month of July, I got kind of behind due to some things in June. And so I have like 4 projects going right now. But they're all vastly different and I'm only working on 2 of them at any given moment, like the front burner, really getting them done. And one of them was vocal transcriptions for vocal solo. So it wasn't new creative work so much as just reworking stuff. And then there's a couple choral pieces, one of which the choral parts are written, I'm just scoring it. And then another choral piece that was just actually being written. And that one's pretty much done, and so now I'm on to another choral piece now that one's out of the way. But I have to kind of carefully manage that, or else I just write pieces that sound the same. Anything else? Yes.
This is completely unrelated to piano, well, kind of. But you said so you made this piano album, and you were talking about, I saw somewhere that you were making a vocal solo album, possibly. When is
Yeah.
that coming out?
It's a vocal solo collection.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You don't want me to record a vocal album?
Well, not album. I meant book. Sorry. Sorry.
I would be the one who was sorry.
But when is that
This
coming
fall.
out? Okay, cool.
Second
And
course.
will that have like songs like these, or which?
A couple of these are in there.
Okay.
And it's transcriptions again. So
Okay.
I took the 10 pieces that people most often ask for.
Which 10?
Is there one you're hoping for?
Well, okay, my favorite piece by you is Entreat Me Not to Leave You. Is that one?
That's a Hinshaw piece. This is a Beckenhorst.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else is
sorry.
there?
It's all like Beckenhorst anthems.
Okay, cool.
Because it's a Beckenhorst
Awesome.
vocal
I was just
publication.
wondering.
So yeah, I have the list in I can show you the list
Awesome.
when we're done here if you want to see.
Awesome.
I couldn't list off the 10. And it's in low, medium, and high.
Awesome.
3 versions. So
Perfect.
something to make hopefully everybody happy, or at least as many of everybody happy as possible. I thought about doing 2 versions and it just wasn't quite going to work, so we went with all 3. So the lows can truly be low and the highs can truly be high. Mediums cannot get stretched beyond either extreme. Well, maybe I should just play a piece for you here. I don't have time to play a piece for you. It's 3:30. Never mind. Let's go.